Right.
All right, so now we are off, and think hopefully this will work. So
Okay,
Fran
so
is in
I will
control.
introduce. Okay, so hello, people. This is the Picky Bastards playlist, and each month we get together and we discuss a few new albums, one album by a classic artist, and a playlist or an album that one of us wants to introduce to the other two. This month the albums are I See You by the XX, Little Fictions by Elbow, The Iceberg by Odyssey, and the classic album is Biophilia by Bjork. And I will be introducing The Tallest Man on Earth to Nick and Nermal. So we'll start with the albums, and I'm going to start by asking Nermal to tell us which one he enjoyed most and tell us a bit about it.
Yeah, so I think among our choices this week is my favorite, absolutely sort of what really stood out for me was the sort of tied, I guess, between Elbow and Odyssey. The Elbow was something quite familiar in terms of what they do, slow building and then crescendo, but I found myself constantly going back to it and mining it for new emotions, sort of really deeply affecting emotions about love and life. And so I was really drawn to it. And then the Odyssey was the other sort of close first on there. And interestingly, I don't know if either of you have heard the soundtrack to Hamilton or heard Hamilton.
No, I've heard
Yeah, I mean, it's a for me, if you know, since both of you have obviously been living under a rock, you don't know much about it. It's a hip hop musical, but it's about Alexander Hamilton. So it's sort of like this coming of age story of this founding father. So there were pieces of the Odyssey that were incredible in terms of the development of a person in a very complex, diverse, racially charged world, and it wasn't filled with a lot of bravado per se, but I thought it was just very deeply affecting.
Okay, well I think maybe should we go with Odyssey now then, and we'll come back.
Yeah, we should pick one and then we can chop them up after the fact. So yeah, I guess go with Odyssey. I agree with that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I do know Hamilton a bit because I know that the guy out of Hamilton is in Clipping, which I think I introduced some time ago. Nermal, the unbelievable experimental hip hop band. They did the space slavery thing.
Yeah.
Splendor and Misery, I think it was called. Anyway, it's pretty amazing stuff. But yeah, so that's my only knowledge about that, the connection or knowledge to that stuff. So, but yeah, I thought the Odyssey was really was great, and I think it was mostly great because I felt it was really nice the way he owned his own kind of context and background, and tried to kind of represent it in a very even-handed way. So in other words, it was a political album, but it was one about which he sort of was clearly talking about his own relatively privileged background, I think. And I thought that was really interestingly well done, interestingly done. I thought it was also a very joyous. And that's another reason why it will connect with the album when we talk about that later on. But it was a very joyous album throughout a lot of it, and whether we can bring this in or not, I'm not sure. But Fran and I went to see him, and that was an extremely joyous gig. I mean, that was really just a really playful, fun experience of like soul music with like everyone in the band is smiling. They're kind of all dancing together in this kind of celebration, which I thought was kind of fascinating and intriguing, and also something, just personally speaking, that was very different from my own taste, normally speaking. So
I think kind of the big difference for me as well with Odyssey, and particularly the live performance, was a lot of hip hop that I've been to see live before. There isn't a band, but with Odyssey, he has an amazing band with him. I think they're called Good Company.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
They were fantastic.
In fact, the bass player was one of the best bass players I've ever seen in any gig. Amazing. It was unbelievable.
massive bass guitar. He was just yeah,
6-string bass. Yeah. It was fantastic.
Yeah, Odyssey for me was also one of my two favourites of the four, and it was the biggest surprise to me, especially after when we originally put the playlist together. We put the odd tape, which is a lot of instrumental versions of Odyssey songs, and I was really not getting on board with that very much, and then luckily Nick pointed out the mistake and we changed it, and for me it's the best hip hop album we've listened to as a group so far.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, it's wildly different from Danny Brown. That's the one that I jumped to when you talk about best hip hop album out of the Picky Bastards. I mean, I feel like that's the one that stuck with me the longest, but obviously it's wildly different. But yeah.
Well, for me, the reason the Odyssey was above anything else is because it was consistent all the way through. I mean, especially the first 8 songs. I think it's an 11-song album. The first 8 songs, they're all incredible. And I think it drops a little bit after that until the last song. But it is just for the first time for me, the hip hop albums, it had incredible lyrics and really good music. I think before we've had a mix where we've had some really good lyrics, but the music's not good, and the other way around. And like for me, the Run the Jewels last time was. The lyrics let down what was a good musical album, and also I felt like Odyssey was also very varied. It was kind of, very relevant to now. There was some funny songs, there was some hard hitting songs, and whereas Run the Jewels for me was consistently the same, really. So I thought this was very strong, very strong.
It was just to speak to the previous. I was into the previous album he had done, which I know we didn't cover in this list. I don't think at any point. And this was a far more political album than that, but I should say that for anyone who's not heard it yet, that it's very much it's a very cleanly apolitical album in some ways. He, for example, the song "Wants to Be" is it "Wants to Be"? Is that one of the tracks?
The "Want to Be Happy."
Yeah. Where
Fantastic.
he's just doing this very, very simple, clean, like I just want to be happy, I just want to be free kind of narrative.
Yeah.
Which is very much akin to the previous album. A bit more like that, which was. Just very fun, So and that's great. I mean, I don't know that I would always gravitate towards it, but it was lucky I got to see it live this month because that helped a lot to contextualize it. But I think it really did work well. Yeah, absolutely.
There was a couple of things for me, Nick, while I was listening to that album that actually I wanted to ask you about because it made me think of other things we've listened to that you maybe didn't get on with. One of them was the song you just pointed out, the "Want to Be," reminded me quite a lot of Anderson .Paak.
Oh yeah.
Obviously, there's a bit more maybe political weight behind Odyssey stuff than Anderson .Paak, but musically, I thought that was quite similar. And you didn't really like Anderson .Paak, did you?
Yeah, the Anderson .Paak just kind of nipped over the line for me into something that was just too light and sunny. Honestly, I know you didn't agree about that, but
how dare you be sunny?
Yeah,
got a problem with optimism. I think
I do. I certainly do. Particularly these days. But no, so I think this was closer to something that I could get my head around, basically. And that's my limitation, not Anderson .Paak's or Odyssey's. But yeah, just to be honest, that was what Odyssey could represent for me, was somebody who was being true, reflective, thoughtful, honest, but also not being overwhelmed with the weight of the political nightmares that we're going through in various ways.
And on that,
kind of connected. I was just gonna say, like, there's something here about Solange as well, especially with "You Grew Up." I was wondering if either of you felt like there was any resonance here with the Solange piece in terms of just the growing up and the changes, reflective of the current mood.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's a trend. There's a lot of albums coming out that have this kind of story to them at the minute. There's another one that I wanted to recommend to you guys to listen to at some point by a guy called Fantastic Negrito, which is similar and also incredible. But I think that, I mean, I can definitely get that association. And incredible albums as well, both of those two. And then Solange and for me, Odyssey are just... And Odyssey I hadn't heard of before, so it was an even bigger surprise to me.
Yeah. I mean, I might actually, if I had to make a comparison, I might actually edge the Solange over this. I think the Solange is more of a collage type album, which I'm really interested in at the moment. So I just think that's a more interesting, like, mosaic way of presenting a load of songs together. I
think the Odyssey is kind of a one-off as well. Sorry? I think the Solange is quite a one-off as well. It's something very... There's bits of that in this album, but I think Solange's album is fully focused on that kind of story,
Yeah.
isn't it? Whereas I don't think the Odyssey is fully focused on it.
Absolutely, yeah. So yeah.
Do we pick? Does anyone want to mention a particular song from the Odyssey that stood out to them? Have we already mentioned them?
I think that one wants to be. If am I right about that song, Tars?
Yeah, I think it's Want to Be.
Want to Be.
Yeah. So that was definitely stuck with me very clearly as one of the moments I just remember seeing in the live gig. Everybody kind of smiling, kind of dancing together as they went through that track, So I thought that was great. But there was no, I didn't actually see like a curve like maybe I should have studied it more closely, but you're suggesting it sort of tailed off a little bit. I didn't actually see that as much. I
don't think it heavily tailed off. I just think until Want to Be actually, I thought they were all so strong, and then for me, Waiting Outside and this Girl I Know, they just weren't as strong. They were still good, but you come back to Rights and Wrongs, which is the final song, and that's incredible.
Right.
For me, it was Hold It Back was the song that stood out. And
right.
Just particularly, I love the verse which starts with "I make more than my sister because I was born as a mister."
Yeah.
I just think it's an incredible lyric, and then that whole verse is just brilliant.
Yeah, it's great. So yeah, okay, Odyssey then. So that's great. Should we move to the next one?
Yeah,
for Fran to say that he's in charge.
We'll go to you, Nick, and you tell us which one you probably had the least interest in.
Okay. All right. So sparks are going to fly.
I know what you're going to say already.
I got to be honest and say that the XX album was. I won't actually say it was a letdown. It was not a very good album in my opinion.
It was a total letdown.
Really? Is that you or me? You speaking for me or you for yourself?
That's
were
me.
you previously a fan then? Or do you know the other two albums?
Yeah, I did.
Wow. Well, that's interesting because to me it wasn't as much of a letdown to some extent because I didn't have brilliant expectations for it, and that's partly because the first album I really liked, and then since then I've increasingly been frustrated by just how cool their image as a band is, and just how unbelievably slick they are, and and at the same time though, as they're doing that, as they're kind of presenting that, how very very similar so much of what they do sounds to me. So that was really difficult to fight. I had to fight against that all the way through, and I will say they won me over a little bit more than I was expecting because I went into it thinking, oh, I'm dreading this to some extent. But in the end, there were some moments that were, I thought, musically beautiful, vocally beautiful. She certainly the two of them have got great voices.
Got incredible voices.
I can't argue with that. And I thought one thing that really was an attempt to do something new, but didn't really play out brilliantly, was actually Jamie XX's beats were sometimes really awkward, I've got to say, in a way I wasn't expecting it, because they got this pitch of like being so unbelievably cool and so like, cutting edge in so many ways. And I just thought some of it just sounded jarring and didn't seem to gel well. The opening song, the name of which I forget, hold on,
it's
Dangerous, was a good example of that to me. The beat and the loops that he's putting into it don't suit the pacing of the song in a weird way. I don't know what it is. It's really hard to pin down, but I just found it immediately jarring and kind of disappointing. So so anyway, ultimately that's my kind of quick summary of them. I think I'm tempted to go further, but I'll restrain myself for now. I will just say that I do think that they really are a one-trick band. I feel like at this point, having done is it 4 albums or 3 albums? 3 albums. They've been producing the same kind of music, pretty similar throughout, and it's been very disappointing to see them continue to be sold as something so radical when they're actually not that radical anymore. So. Sorry for those who would like them.
I think we should go to Nirmal, see if he also thinks it's a letdown, because I might have a slightly different opinion of this album. So,
again, I think for me it was I have really enjoyed their music, and I think there's something about there was a certain darkness in their lyrics.
A certain darkness. Everything's totally immersed in black. It's like they're just like dressed in black head to toe, and it's
Well,
like
I mean, I
every
think
single-
that's what. So sort of way, that was like that's kind of what was appealing to me. But in here, in this album, actually, I thought they started to, if I was maybe disagree a little bit with Nick here, I thought they had these gestures towards optimism and, connection and stuff. But when when they went that way, I thought it was so, for lack of a better word, cheesy that I just thought, are they being sarcastic now? Or are they actually being serious? Like, say something loving or something like that. It just I was reminded of the album that we did a few sessions ago by.
If you compare it to White Horses, I'm going to fall out with you.
The wedding one.
Bat for Lashes.
Yeah, Bat for Lashes. Like, there are moments in there where I was kind of confused as to what the tone of that was. If it's genuine, just euphoric sense of, oh, I'm just so in love with this person. To is this really supposed to be the saccharine? And so I had some of those moments, but I had an interesting experience with the XX where my first, I guess, 2 to 3 listens, I was really into it, actually, and the melodies were coming back to me. I think Violent Noise came back to me a lot. Thought that stood out, and Replica as well. And then the more I listened to it, the less I wanted to listen to it, which was really kind of interesting. It sort of grow old. It went sort of old on me quickly, and that was kind of an interesting sort of feeling I had from it. Yeah.
Right. I also found after I really had to, well, as it was running in the background, as I was like whatever, getting dressed, whatever, getting in the shower, whatever, it would be like incredibly irritating, and I would just be like, why am I annoyed right now? Like, what is it that's getting to me right now? Like, everything's fine in the world. and then I'd realize it was this fucking album. So yeah. Anyway, that was the problem.
All right,
Fran hasn't had a chance to
I'm
speak
going to
yet.
step in and say that this was my favourite album of the 4. I loved Odyssey as well. I struggled to separate the two.
Right.
For me, this album, you two are going to love this after what you've just been saying. It's possibly the XX's best album. It's the first one for me where there is, what you said, Nick, about the become a one-trick pony, and I think the first album was so simple and so perfect that the second album, because it was exactly the same as the first album, kind of suffered, even though it's got some good songs in it. But for me, this album, there is some variation. Jamie XX is more prominent, and I like what you said about it being sort of awkward, but I kind of like that. It's kind of, Dangerous is a good example. It's quite chaotic, but I think it works really well. And the cheesiness, Say Something Loving, maybe once I would maybe agree on that, but I think actually they became a bit more open on this song, and knowing a bit about the band. Replica and Lips were my 2 favourite songs, but Replica, a song about Oliver, the male singer's drug addiction, and the last year he's been in recovery, and his dad was a drug addict, and it's kind of, he's been trying not, and those songs, they felt more open to me this time and less generic, the whole album, than like some of the lyrics they've done before. So I mean, it really connected with me this
It's
album.
really interesting whether or not that contextual information is actually helping to support. I'm not saying it's perfectly fine if it does. I'm just wondering if you think the fact that you know that it's about this really poignant story about his drug addiction.
Well, I only found that
makes a
out later
difference.
because I've been listening to it, and
Okay.
I was intrigued by the lyrics because they kind of struck a chord with me, and I went and read about it, and then found out. So I think it had already sort of struck a chord with me before that.
Okay.
But yeah, for me, I did think that I definitely thought Nick was not going to like this album.
Oh yeah.
I'd already predicted that. I'm more surprised by your reaction, Nermal. We usually agree, so I mean, it's me getting ganged up on for a change. But yeah, I mean, I loved it. I was going to point out 2 songs, Lips. I just thought Lips just did everything that the XX are good at. It's just showing off their vocals brilliantly. It's It's
Mm.
I just loved it. And Replica was the other. But can you two pick a song, or is there no songs on there for you?
I thought Replica was stronger among the
Mm.
ones we're talking about. Yeah, there was one later on in the album as well. Was it On Hold? Or
I was going to ask what you both thought of On Hold, because On Hold's probably their danciest song so far. And when I heard it as the first single, on first listen, I was like, oh no, what have they done? But having listened to it more, it's really grown on me. And live, I saw these live this month as well. Oh, they were incredible. And On Hold was absolutely brilliant.
He's like breathless as he tells you.
Honestly, one of the best, for me, the best gig I've been to since I went to see Radiohead last year. So I thought they were amazing. But yeah, I'm glad neither of you two were there.
Making you miserable. Yeah, it could have been a problem.
Can you pick a song, Nirmal? Was there any songs that you enjoyed, or?
I thought Violent Noise,
Yeah,
I actually really did like Replica, and then Violent Noise was stayed with me quite a bit.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's the XX.
So yeah, XX is done and dusted, for better or worse.
I'm gonna say we go to. I think we maybe save Elbow till last of the album. So
Okay.
should we go to Bjork now?
Like a Bjork, yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'll kick us off if you want. So I listened a lot to this album. I listened a lot to all these albums this month. And by the way, we didn't really mention what we thought of the whole playlist at the start, but yeah, I enjoyed it all. I listened to them all quite a lot. You'll find out some feelings about Elbow later that maybe you might not agree with, but
Okay.
but with Bjork, I listened a lot to it, and I still feel like I need more time with it. I still feel like I haven't fully cracked it yet. I feel like I enjoyed it. Maybe sometimes it was a bit too sleepy. I was a little bit too, like the bell sound throughout was a bit too lullaby-ish for me.
Yeah, I
Mm.
agree with that.
But then when she couldn't, my favourite song was Mutual Core, which I think just did everything she does well on this album. It did the really chilled sections really well, but then it got really aggressive, and her voice is just so unique and so interesting that she doesn't change it from when she's singing something chilled to when she's being aggressive, but the music changes, and she just, I don't know, I really enjoyed that song, and there's a few songs on there that I love, but as a whole album, I'm still working it out.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. I think it's maybe not surprisingly, given it's Bjork, a really enigma, really hard to break into, really hard to read, and I suppose some of the overriding concerns I had were actually, to go on to the negative first and I'll go into the positive, were that sometimes I was worried that her voice was so powerfully, well, both high in the mix and she's obviously very, very capable, that it kind of blew out some other elements sometimes, and it sounded like she was enjoying, which is great that she enjoys it, but it sounded like she was enjoying making those big notes to the point where it kind of felt like it was almost in the service of that and not in the service of the song, if that makes any sense. So just on a couple of occasions, I think, actually I really liked Crystalline as a song overall, but there were moments in Crystalline where I think she was doing that a little bit, where she was kind of like hitting these huge hard notes that she can do quite effortlessly. And I think I just worried that maybe that wasn't actually done entirely for the purpose of making the song better, and rather that she was just reveling in the moment of that kind of euphoria, which is it's not a terrible thing to do, but it's just maybe not quite as controlled as I might like, you know. So there's that, and yeah, I think the dreaminess is there. That's definitely something that's always interesting and sometimes problematic with her stuff. I suppose when I listen to this, although I like experimental music, I'm always pushed to feel like, what is it about pop? What's the pop music element that I like? Like, what is it in my own taste that's actually pop music? Because when I hear some of these songs with like almost no chorus verse structure, like, you know, in some cases, not in all cases, I just get this sense of like I want to pull back to something that's more structured, more within a framework that I can kind of read. So anyway, that's kind of my initial sort of concerns. It's a very beautiful album. I think it has a massive amount of depth to it, though, and I think you could spend a hell of a long time with it, as Fran was saying, and keep going. And that's to its credit, very much to its credit. The only other one of hers that I knew well was, is it Medulla? Medulla, yeah, the one with just built out entirely out of voices. I knew that one fairly well, but I think I like that one. I think I actually prefer this one, having got into it somewhat. So I think I'll leave it at that for now. What do you think, Nermal?
I would say that it is, if there were a word I would try to associate with it, is massive. Just in terms of its maybe ambition, but also the feeling that it is attempting to evoke in you is just this incredible spaciousness to it, and huge, and
good point, yeah.
I want to pick up on this idea of it being this is really interesting idea that it's not entirely safe, and it doesn't rely on these very familiar pop structures, and so there's something really dangerous about it. And if I was to go back to the first song from the XX, the first song on the playlist is Dangerous, and that's like so not dangerous at all, as opposed to this music, which is nervous energy and then soothing and then chaotic and universal at the same time, just trying to be in terms of its lyrics and subject matter. And so it was kind of enthralling but hard at the same time. I'm thinking of Crystalline as a embodiment of that spirit. Like it's
sounds like we're all drawn to that song in particular. Yeah, absolutely. That's
really
one I side as well. Yeah,
fascinating. But I can't listen to it unless I'm ready to listen to it, because by the last 2 minutes of it or a minute of it, I'm just like, kind of like, somebody please, stop this.
One interesting question I think is related to that, maybe not to cut you off, is I wonder, having done the Aphex Twin album a couple of cycles ago, and I remember one of us, maybe it was me, even saying I really respected it and really enjoyed it, but I don't know how many times I can imagine myself thinking, I'm going to stick some Aphex Twin on,
Yeah, you were the only one who said you enjoyed it.
Okay. Oh, you didn't enjoy it, right. But I think even at that point, even though I did enjoy it, I think I don't know if I would jump to put it on. Is that something? Would that be the case for this as well? How often would either of you think, all right, I'm going to go and listen to Biophilia?
Yeah, I'd go with that. It's not one that I would, but not in the same way that Aphex Twin isn't. Aphex Twin, I wouldn't listen to regularly because I just didn't see anything from it. I didn't get anything from it. Whereas Bjork, I get a lot from it, but I agree with what Nermal said. You have to be in a mood for Bjork, and you have to be in a mood for this album. But I think I will listen. I will carry on to listen to this album, and I will listen to this album again. And Aphex Twin, I would never have listened to again. I didn't want to listen to it then. But
I love that album.
I'm just going to bring something up about Bjork, and it goes again with a little bit of it being kind of dangerous and a little bit inaccessible. And the one album that it reminded me of while I was listening to it was Kid A by Radiohead. And I know Bjork and Tom York do a lot of stuff together, and they write together and everything. But there was times with this album, like, because I know everyone has said it at the time of Kid A coming out, that it was very inaccessible, and it doesn't seem so much anymore because music's moved on. But did either of you see that sort of association, the sort of Radiohead thing? But not,
hasn't occurred to me, but I think it is a good association. Yeah, I think it is. I mean, but I personally find Kid A to be less hard work. Maybe I just know it a lot better.
I think that's it, because I think Kid A. I remember when I first listened to Kid A, as someone who loved the Bends and OK Computer at the time, I found it took me a year or so to really appreciate that. Now, actually, when I listen to Kid A, it's one of the albums I enjoy least of Radiohead's, because it just doesn't do it for me in the same way that some of theirs, because of that sort of distance, I think.
Really?
And I think this has got that same sort of distance. And I think this, I mean, people talk about Kid A influence in all sorts of music, and I can certainly see it with this album.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know how much. What was the date time? I can't remember now. Of Kid A.
This is much more recent than Kid A. Yeah,
okay.
It's a few years after.
Right. Yeah. So no, that's a good association. Yeah.
The song I can't quite say it.
Cosmogony.
Cosmogony. Cosmogony is beautiful. So beautiful, I thought. And if I was to go back again, like Fran was saying, Kid A, Aphex Twin, the only reason I would go back to Aphex Twin is if I'm trying to find a way to represent 2 seconds of something that happens in some other context, like sampling or something like that.
Right.
But something like Cosmogony, I went back to, maybe it might be my favorite song on the entire list.
Wow.
On the entire list, wow.
Entire list. I that song was so appealing to me. And epic.
Yeah, epic's a good word for that. I hate the word epic usually, but it's a good term for this album.
That's acceptable this time. He's given you a green light for that.
Oh, thank you.
Go ahead.
It's been used in the right context for
Yes.
once. Usually it's been used for like a bus ride or a chocolate bar or something. So you can use it about Bjork, don't use it about a Galaxy Caramel.
Sort of incidentally, the Tom York connection really makes me think that there is a band out there that needs that name, the kind of the Bjork York connection.
Maybe we should
Nice.
change the name of the playlist.
No,
Again.
let's not do that. Let's not do that. We only just settled on this one, for Christ's sake. All right, so I think we have, as well as the playlist, we have one more of the actual album. Should we do the Elbow album first,
Let's
and then
do
we'll do the
Elbow,
playlist?
yeah.
Yes, let's
do
talk about
Elbow.
Elbow.
Yeah.
So Nirmal's already said that this was possibly his favourite alongside Odyssey. What about you, Nick?
It was not my favourite.
Was Odyssey your favourite?
Odyssey was my favourite, yeah. I think it has, and we're fresh. We'll let everyone know that we're fresh from seeing Elbow just yesterday.
Yep.
Fran and I. So
Sorry, Nirmal.
sorry about that. And they played.
Sad.
They actually didn't play a ton of the new album, really, in the whole set. They played, a few, but not heavily leaning on it. But the new album to me is reliable and solid, and has some really exquisite moments in it, and especially lyrically. I think of all the elements of the band as they've kind of the arc of all their improvement, and they kind of, everyone has that, they get steadily better, then ultimately peak and then get worse again. I think lyrically, I think he may still be at his peak. I think
he's incredible.
I think lyrically, I think he's working so subtly and so cleverly. That I think it's amazing. So to me, there was particularly songs. All Disco was really and summed up really what's most challenging for that band now. I think they're kind of bottling joy. I feel like I think they're basically writing songs about things which are mundane, making them seem and making them present as moving, powerful, poignant, etc. And that's really an amazing achievement. The challenge when you do that, though, is to not make a cheesy piece of music, not make a sort of schmaltzy, too romantic piece of music. And I think they come pretty close to that on a couple of occasions. So although I think All Disco is an example where they pull it off, I think, where the idea that the old timers, growing old, kind of telling each other dirty jokes and all this kind of stuff, all that stuff is really, really well done. A much weaker song is actually the opening song, I think, Magnificent She Says, which is basically a very nice idea of this little girl on the beach, finds this piece of broken glass, thinks it somehow imbues it with meaning of it being like a crystal or a jewel or something, and therefore elevating all our consciousnesses by her perception of something more important. I think that's really a beautiful sentiment. But unfortunately, it just slides into schmaltzy. It slides into just too cheesy, and the use of this and the actual notion of that magnificent, the actual use of the word magnificent, it's just too much. It's just over. It nips it over the line, like I said the phrase earlier, I think. And that's
goodness, Nick, who hurt you? Who hurt you, Nick?
So many people, yourself included.
How is that possible? A little girl finding something beautiful and her not realizing how important she is to the world is somehow unacceptable.
But I think it's also a little bit laboured. I think that they've done it before. I mean, Lippy Kids is absolutely that sentiment, isn't it? It's that
Yeah.
like
But delivered
ruffian,
much better.
exactly, ruffian little kids who don't understand their significance and how actually angelic and beautiful the concept of their existence is. And I think that's an incredible song, and I heard it last night, and it was amazing.
It was one of the highlights.
But this is an example of where it just seems like they're treading water a little bit, frankly. Even though lyrically, I think he's still got all those skills. I just don't think they have as much to say right now in some cases. But there's lots of this album I do really like, so I don't want to slate it. I really enjoyed it, but I just think it's not their finest.
So normally it was your favourite alongside Odyssey, so can let us know. Why?
I want to sort of, if I was to pick up on the the music and lyrics of sort of together in tension with each other, and to what Nick is saying, that sort of possible cheesiness and schmaltziness of it. If you read the lyrics too, I would just look at Little Fictions, the song, and you look at the lyrics and you see love is the original miracle.
Yep.
Read that and you're like, okay then, whatever.
Whatever.
or life is the original miracle. All right then, pro-lifer, then whatever.
I don't know about that.
It might not be a pro-lifer who thinks that.
Okay,
But,
but then when you hear it and you hear how he says it and sings it after the opening bit of that song where he's saying, I just have to repeat this stanza. It's just so incredible lyrically, where it says, a muffled battle cry across the kitchen table, bridges up, portcullis down, and round the Tower of Babel. I'm babbling in my dreams of blue berserkers coming at me, eyes and tongues and rusty knives, and God Almighty laughing at me. You go from that to love is the original miracle, the build of it, the story that's being told about this argument around a kitchen table to something epic, kind of huge in scale and beautiful. It's exhilarating.
I think that's a really good explanation of that, and I think you're absolutely right on pretty much all counts. And in fact, I do think Little Fictions, the vocal melody in Little Fictions, in that refrain, and when he actually uses the phrase "Little Fictions," is absolutely vocally stunning, isn't it? I mean, it's so beautiful. So yes, I don't think I'm disagreeing with you. All I'm saying is I think that's a strong point. All Disco is a strong point. There are others, but there are also some moments like Magnificent which are not so great. But anyway, Fran hasn't spoken too much, I don't think, about this.
So, as we disagreed on the XX, I think we're probably going to disagree a little bit on Elbow. I was hugely disappointed with this album. And not because it's not a good album, it's a decent album, but for Elbow, for me it's just not good enough. I'd say it moved towards something much more bland than they've ever done before. I felt there's a couple of songs on there that I felt were Elbow songs, and were Gentle Storm and Firebrand and Angel, for me, were the two highlights.
Yeah.
And they were the two times when it really felt like Elbow. Other times, I was actually quite bored. I started towards the end of this playlist, because I'd listened to it all quite a lot. I started just listening to the whole thing on shuffle. And sometimes the Elbow songs had come up, and they're okay on their own, I think, but I was just, if you listen to the three of Trust the Sun, All Disco, and Head for Supplies in a row, I was bored and I needed to listen to something else. And then the same happens with K2, Montparnasse, and Little Fictions and Kindling. I'm sorry, they all made me a bit sleepy. And last night actually, when we saw them,
They played Kindling, didn't they?
the first half of when we saw, they were good. They're very good at what they do. But the first half, they were playing songs to me. It was a bit meandering for a while, and then earlier than the second half, but when they played The Birds from an earlier album, and it really started to kick in. And I think that feels like what Elbow have done to me with this album, is they've taken a step back to something a lot blander. They're still lyrically fantastic, and I think that saves this album. There's times, even on the songs I don't like that much, like All Disco and Head for Supplies, there's just some absolutely fantastic lines, and I think it saves it. But I'm going to agree with Nick on Magnificent. She says I think it's too much
I don't agree on most things you said, but one thing I would agree was with Kindling, that last song, with that drum loop in it, or that whatever that just sort of plodding drum beat. I mean, they've lost their drummer in the last, he didn't die, he just left the band in the last year, and they've obviously relied upon more on some processing and loops and stuff. They do have a drummer for the live gigs, but he's kind of an additional new session musician kind of thing. But anyway, in that actual case, I just felt like it was a weak song to end on. It was, especially given that they've ended on some of the songs in the past, like Grace Under Pressure, for example, is one I'm obsessed with from Cast of Thousands and stuff. Some of these songs near the ends of those previous albums are just staggering. So it was a very light note to end on, and seemed, and especially percussively, sounded a little bit not sloppy is overstating it, but a little bit casual, let me put it that way. So that was one of the weakest songs as well. It was the first one and the last one were the two weakest songs on the album, I think.
I was really interested when you told me last night that the drummer had left the band, because that kind of explained to me a little bit what was lacking from this album for me. And I hadn't thought about it until you said it, but usually the drums are so important to this band, and for me the best Elbow songs are the sort of really driving songs, and the really, Grounds for Divorce, The Birds, ones that like build a lot, and for me that didn't happen that often on this album. I mean, I love Gentle Storm and I love Firebrand and Angel, and there's a couple of songs I do like. I mean, I'm not saying this is a terrible album. I'm just saying, because I hold Elbow in such high regard, it was a disappointing album for me.
Right.
And I spent a bit of time listening to the previous album and Seldom See Kid, just to reassure myself before we went to see them. And those albums are just, even though I'm not sure what you guys think of the last album, but it changes up a lot. It's got songs like Charge, it's got loads of energy, and then it's got some really lovely, beautiful, relaxing songs as well. But usually Elbow mix that up. For me, they didn't mix that up enough on this album. There was just 3 or 4 very meandering songs in a row on a couple of occasions, and it made me sad.
You're in an interesting position, actually, related to how I feel about PJ Harvey, who's an even bigger obsession for me in this band. Although I did really come to realise last night watching this band that they are one of my top 5 bands ever, really. But PJ Harvey's even higher up that list. And her last album was the first I've ever heard of hers that I didn't really, really love. And that was a situation where the album has some very admirable qualities, but just doesn't quite push hard enough and isn't thought out enough and all this kind of stuff. So I sympathise with it, even though I don't think I'm not in that position with Elbow. I mean, they're definitely, maybe they're past their peak. I don't know if that's fair to say. This album is not their peak. I think it's acceptable, and it's more than acceptable. It's still a really good album.
I mean, even though I didn't love that album, I don't think Elbow can't come back with another brilliant album.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to bring up Radiohead again. Sorry, I'm going to do it all the time. But an example of a band that this is what gets me is, I think Elbow, I've always saw them as a similar sort of trajectory, even though Radiohead are a bigger band. But, they've changed it up quite a lot, and they've kept it interesting. And if you look at Radiohead's album last year, it was kind of mind-blowing, whereas Elbow are that sort of, I would want something as interesting from them, and this wasn't.
Elbow have got a tougher job than Radiohead in a way, though, because Radiohead have built a reputation for writing weird and out-of-place melodies, structures, and studio productions, whereas Elbow have basically got a reputation for making beautiful, beautiful melodies over incredible lyrics. Now, maybe that's something that becomes more one note over time.
Yeah.
Whereas Radiohead can always say, right, well, we'll just throw the rulebook out again, because that's what we do, is throw the rulebook out, you know. So anyway, I don't know. Maybe that point is moot, but it's interesting. Yeah.
But if you compare this to Seldom Seen Kid, I mean, it's not, Seldom Seen Kid is not just beautiful lyrics over melodies, is it? I mean, you've got songs like Grounds for Divorce that are just raucous, and that's what lacked from this for me. It wasn't. There's no Charge from the last album, or there's no Grounds for Divorce, or there's no. It was just it was a bit meandering for me.
Right.
I still I don't want to say I hate it. I don't hate it, but I don't love it either, which is a shame.
It's not the XX, is it? After all, Jesus.
I mean,
they dodged that bullet.
Magnificent, she says, has 10 times the cheese of the XX album all wrapped up in one, if you ask me.
There's not much cheese in the XX. Anyway, let's not get back onto that. All right, so that leaves Tallest Man on Earth.
That leaves the Tallest Man on Earth, which
so you're going to give some context there.
Yeah, I've been generally quite nervous about what you guys think about this, because I know it's, from what we've spoke about in the past, it's not the kind of thing you guys maybe talk about a great deal, but I'm going to just give a bit of background here. So, Tallest Man on Earth, his real name Christian Mattsson. He's a 34-year-old Swedish singer-songwriter. He's got 4 albums, which for me are all exceptional, and 2 very good EPs as well. He records everything live on his own in his bedroom. He plays a lot of instruments. He plays a guitar, piano, violin, banjo, and harmonica. Whenever you read an article about Tallest Man on Earth, they will immediately compare him to Bob Dylan, and I get that it's a fair comparison. Although I don't feel like he is a Dylan rip-off, as some other people have said, and also as some other singers are. He says he grew up listening to Dylan, Woody Guthrie, Pete Seeger, and says they were obviously an influence, but then he also talks about people like Nick Drake, and he got his big break supporting your two's favourite band, Bon Iver, so, that was a big one for him. He's one of my favourite artists, and also, as I've mentioned before in my email, if we'd done this playlist 10 years ago, you would have been getting all recommendations that sounded like Oasis from me, and that would have been it, really. And then I started listening to The National, and then from them I got into bands with people like The Tallest Man on Earth, and it's been a big change in my musical taste. So I just wanted to share this guy with you and see what you thought. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts. Nick, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, can do. So in general, I was really impressed. I thought it was. I thought in general the comparisons that people, and I think understandably, make with Dylan are positive ones, in the sense that the attributes he has are the best side of what Dylan does, and I thought that was really well executed, and there was particularly now what's the song here was There's No Leaving Now. I thought that was really, really strong, and lyrically very strong, and a lot of energy. And also I thought he did a good job of presenting a lot of energy behind what is only an acoustic guitar. And I thought that was very skillful. People just default to an instrument's best sort of tonal range, and with grand piano they start playing huge chords and that kind of thing. So with acoustic, people just often are very tentative, and I think he is not. So I think that worked really well.
I tried purposely to actually pick songs that mix, because I know I could have easily made a playlist of 15 songs of his that are all very slow songs, but
right.
So I started with Fields of Our Home and then followed it with King of Spain, purposely because King of Spain is probably one of the most energetic songs that he does, and he's not like Nermal said about Sufjan Stevens before. He's just relentlessly miserable.
Right.
I mean, I like what I've heard of his, but I don't think Tallest Man on Earth does that, which I think is a positive.
Right. I also really liked the tone, just to make a mention of the Dreamer. The actual guitar tone of the Dreamer. He's using overdrive there in a really great way, which reminded me of Grizzly Bear. If either of you are familiar with that, what's that album called? Velcamus? Ventinus? Something like that.
Ventinus,
So there's a really great couple of songs off that where he's hitting. All the velocity changes on the guitar are handled really well, so it makes it sound like he's playing with the same instrument, both very calmly and very aggressively. With no kind of digital trickery, just with how aggressively he's actually performing, which I thought worked really, really well. If I had a sort of caveat to things, I'd just say that which is something that Fran even hinted that people had said before, which is if you were to not be careful about listening to this, you might think, what do I get out of this that I wouldn't get out of a classic Dylan album? Like, in some case, you'd be like, okay, well, he's executing well with really cleverly thought out lyrics, a lot of energy, and and he even has the vocal twang sometimes, not so much. But King of Spain is an example of one where I think he sounds more like Dylan in
That's
actual
an earlier
voice.
One. It's earlier stuff where he sounds more like Dylan, I think.
Right, and I think that he's sometimes a little bit in a danger zone there, that he might end up coming across that way. But I think if you dig into it, it's well worth it. Yeah, so I was impressed. What about you, Neville?
Yeah, I would agree with everything that you said, Nick, and also loving the variety of the speeds and intensity. Intensity of the different tracks. If there were to pick up a couple of them, The Dreamer and Love Is All were both stood out to me. I love the meditative lyric. Like, it's an album that or an artist that I really felt like I have to pay attention to. When I was listening to it, if I was listening to it and I had Bjork on in the background, once it got kind of like crazy with the Bjork stuff, I'd switch it and it's like, okay, I don't have to pay attention to this anymore, or I have to move on. We moved right after that to Tallest Man on Earth, and I just kind of wanted to put everything down and just sit there and listen to it and listen to the line, listen to the storytelling, listen to the melodies. Made me pay attention in a really good way. And so I enjoyed it quite a bit. I would say it is not something that is easy to listen to if you're doing something else. If you're really invested in paying attention though, and actually want to experience it and take a moment and listen to it. It's.
And why do you think that is, Neil? Do you think that's a lyrical thing, or do you think that's?
I think it's a lyrical thing. I think it's a. I think it. There are these. If I was doing something else and listened to it, I would hear a few phrases. I'm like, what, that sort of impede into my brain space, and then I'd say, what is that? And then it just makes you put everything down. It really interrupts the flow of life in a really good way. Good thing.
I think that's it's really nice to hear you say that, because that's how I feel about him. And I think I mentioned in my email that every now and then there's a line in his songs that he just makes you pay attention to. And one of the examples for me is in There's No Leaving Now, when he says all the little things you need to build a home, and the lyric just comes out of nowhere, but the way he delivers it, you're just like, shit, I've got to sit and listen to what he's talking about now. And he does the same in You're Going Back, when he says, driver, please don't go this fucking way, and it's just it just grabs you. And I think it's really I'm really glad to hear you say a lot of things that I thought on this, because I wasn't sure what you two would think of him. And I'm also really glad, Nick, that you picked out There's No Leaving Now, because that's my favourite song by him. And it was one song that I toyed with not putting on, because it is one of the ones where he gets a bit maudlin and a bit miserable, and I thought maybe you guys wouldn't be as into that song. But I'm really glad to hear
we do Maudlin and Miserable all day long. You're joking. Maudlin and Miserable is our absolute stock in trade.
Yeah, but then if you think about bands that I like Bon Iver, and you don't like them for that reason. So I think because he's got variation though that maybe some of the others don't. I mean, The Dreamer,
it's all about execution, isn't it, in the end?
The Dreamer as well. So
it's
The
all about
Gardener was the
execution,
one
I
that
think.
really got me into them. The Gardener's an incredible song as well. So, well, great to hear that you both enjoyed him.
Great. Well, that gets us to all through the 5.
It does.
Okay, and there we have it. That's the first of the recorded podcasts for Picky Bastards. Hope people found it interesting. We'll have another one next month. We haven't decided on all the albums yet, but some of them will include Sampa the Great Mixtape, Hooray for Riff Raff, his album from just a couple weeks ago, The Navigator, an album by Loyal Kana called Yesterday's Gone, and I think we're also going to be covering Idol's Brutalism. Then there's a couple more that will be announced as we go through the month on the Twitter handle, which is @PickyBastards. Okay, hope you enjoyed it. Thanks, bye.